Hi, welcome back to my Doctor Who channel. This is my second video, and today I want to talk about the Doctor Who books of my life. These are the Doctor Who reference works that sort of mark the history of my fandom. And I go back right to when I was a kid. I first started watching Doctor Who when I was about 4 years old. It was 1976, Planet of Evil, I think was my very first episode. And this book came into my possession. I'm going to have to hold it very carefully, because as you can see, it's in a bit of a state. Look at that, look at those pages. I don't know if you can see them. This book was my favourite book as a child. I used to pore over it. It is, I don't know if you can see this, full of old black and white photographs, like iconic photos from the history of the series. So you have the classic Cybermen at St. Paul's. You have the classic, I'm going to find it because it's so classic, the Daleks. I used to pore over this. I used to write over it in biro. My God, this book has seen some damage over the years, but I loved it. It was everything that a 5-year-old boy wants about Doctor Who. Loads of pictures of monsters, beautifully taken black and white shots in this book. Now, what did I also used to pore over? This. Those 4 faces. Look at those faces. And what you notice about those faces is something. None of them are smiling. They look miserable and cross. They look like they're having a really bad time. That made a real impact on me. It made an impact on my young imagination. The Doctor was someone serious, I hated it when John Nathan Turner came along and Peter Davison was always smiling and always looking nice. This was the Doctor to me. There was something serious about the Doctor, And I loved these 4 pictures. I loved this opening section. Look at that. Look at that title page. Sorry, I'm covering up Tom Baker's face. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? To me, that's what Doctor Who was, I didn't want it to be nice and spangly and, colourful like it was in the 80s. I wanted it to be dark and grim. I wanted it to be serious. People died in Doctor Who. They never died in the A-Team. They never died in other series like the Tomorrow People. But in Doctor Who they died, and they died horribly. They died screaming. And the Doctor cared. This was a serious business. Star Wars, you see, was too nice. It was too clean and bright for me. I wanted sci-fi like that. Black and white and miserable. And so these images, were really powerful for me. They really made an impression on me. And that's why this book is so special. A friend has lent me this, which is actually a lovely clean version of the book. But I still favour this battered old version. Now, when I came of age as a fan was when I was about 10 years old and Peter Davison took over as the Doctor. And the following year, it was the 20th anniversary. For younger fans, I can't tell you how exciting it was to celebrate the 20th anniversary. You guys are going to be celebrating the 60th next year. But celebrating the 20th was a massive event. I went to Longleat. I went to the Longleat convention. I queued up for hours in those queues. Oh my God, there were so many people. It was complete chaos. And I looked forward to the 20th anniversary story. But there was also this. Now, this book has dated badly. But at the time, it was the book on Doctor Who. It was the reference work. It went through every single story. It had a little paragraph on every single story. And it was official. So it was official that the Gunfighters was the worst Doctor Who story ever, which it actually says in here. And there's little pieces on all the actors who've been in the series, loads of beautiful photographs. And for me, this was a huge part of the 20th anniversary, and it was a sort of Bible for many, many years, until more well-researched fan works came along that actually showed that Peter Haining was talking out of his bum. But up until that point, this was a great book. And it was followed a year later, for the 21st anniversary, by this book, The Key to Time, which I have just as many fond memories of. I particularly liked about this book, it was full of art, fan art. Peter Haining invited people to submit artwork, And some of it is brilliant, you know, it's really beautiful. And I was really excited by this. I don't know why, you know, it seems a very basic idea now. But, you know, just constant artworks by fans that sort of made this sort of timeline of Doctor Who's history much more exciting. But fans were going to get more involved in Doctor Who over the years. And come the 90s, this is when fans really took control of Doctor Who. And you got really good, insightful discussions of Doctor Who. And the key book was this one, The Discontinuity Guide. Every single fan reference work is influenced by this book. They've basically just copied it. It was the first time that a group of fans, these three fans at the bottom, basically took Doctor Who and did a completely personal rundown of it, criticising it, mocking it, picking out what they liked, picking out what they didn't like, and basically just deconstructing it completely, as this cover shows. And, you know, we forget, but before this book there was nothing like it. After it, there was tons like it. And every single fan reference book since has basically copied its structure. So they did this thing where they amassed all the continuity, so that what continuity came from each story. They did things like dialogue triumphs, dialogue disasters. They did things like double entendres, costume disasters. And they put a very personal, very biased, very partisan opinion on every single story. This became the Bible for fans, and it's a book I remember very, very well. It kind of blew up Doctor Who fandom. It made Doctor Who fandom come of age. If you've never got a copy, it's still worth getting a copy of this book. The next book that I want to talk about is this book, Doctor Who from A to Z, which came out in the late 90s, so it's only about the classic series. Now, this book, I would argue, is probably the single best reference work I've ever read on Doctor Who. It was written by Gary Gillett, who was a one-time editor of Doctor Who magazine, very good editor, I think. And what he does is he basically goes through the alphabet, A to Z, picking out one topic for each letter. So he goes through things like regeneration, he talks about race in Doctor Who, he talks about sexism in Doctor Who, he talks about Saturdayness, he talks about the Daleks and the appeal of the Daleks, he talks about Robert Holmes, he talks about all those things that fans talk about. And he gives about like a 4-page essay on each thing. His writing is excellent. He's one of the wittiest, cleverest, most perceptive of Doctor Who critics. And I still think to this day this is the single best book written about the classic series. It's so good. It's well illustrated, it's beautifully produced, but most importantly, it's very, very well written. And finally, I would like to talk about this series written by Rob Shearman and Toby Haddock. Basically what this is these two guys, very popular fan commentators and writers, just doing a marathon of the series, right from the first episode, Anne Lithy Child, going through it, and each of them has their say on each individual episode of Doctor Who. When I did the marathon of the series recently, this was my constant companion. I read what Toby and Rob had to say after every single episode, and I loved it. It was like sharing with a group of friends your ideas on each episode. And I found that I love their commentary. It's irreverent, but it's also informed, it's intelligent, and it's also very honest. And I like the fact that they try to point out the positives of every single episode. It's a really fantastic read, and I found myself very seldom disagreeing with them. About the story that I most disagreed with them was Mask of Mandragora, which is a classic, but they didn't seem to like very much. Most fans don't, even though it's beautiful. Unfortunately, when I got to the 80s, I found out that the 80s one hasn't come out yet, which is a real shame. The 60s and 70s ones are available. And I do hope they bring out the 80s one very, very soon, because I love this series. It's very funny, it's very laid back. This is the kind of thing that fans say when they've watched an episode. And I really, really recommend this series. Well, thanks for that. If you've got any books that you particularly like about Doctor Who, please let me know in the comments below. Those are only my favourites, but there's plenty of other books I could have mentioned. The About Time series, the books of Graham Burke and Robert Smith. But those are my particular favourites. Let me know in the comments what you think. Thanks very much.